States, the UN Secretary General is there, Arab countries are there. Those talks apparently have failed. We are awaiting a press conference which has been delayed. We don't know if the delay is due to last-minute bargaining or because the talks have failed, but sources are telling us that the talks have failed. We see there the room, the press eagerly awaiting this press conference, a statement to tell us what exactly has transpired at those Rome talks that were supposed to find a way out of this crisis. We know that there were huge differences between the United States, which was co-hosting those talks with the Italians. The United States saying that an immediate ceasefire right now is not a good way to go, that Hezbollah needs to be degraded, its power degraded so that an international force can step in and be able to resolve this crisis once and for all. The U.S. speaking of a sustainable ceasefire, not just a ceasefire for ceasefire's sake. That it was something that the UN Secretary General, Arab countries and others did not agree with. They wanted an immediate ceasefire to ease the suffering and negotiate. But the United States thinks that's not a good idea because it will not help resolve the crisis in a sustainable way. Once again, sources telling us that the talks in Rome have failed. We will bring you the latest on this. We continue to monitor and wait for that press conference, which we'd like to bring to you live. The Israeli Foreign Ministry says that the deaths of 4 United Nations observers will be, quote, thoroughly investigated. Joining me now from Jerusalem to talk about this is Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman Mark Regev. Mr. Regev, thank you so much for joining us. What is the response to the very sharp, explosive comments from the UN Secretary General? He says that this was an apparently deliberate targeting of his staff, a very well-marked UN compound in southern Lebanon.
Well, earlier today, my Prime Minister, Mr. Olmert, spoke directly with Kofi Annan. And the first thing is we expressed our sympathy at this tragic event. Everyone regrets what happens. But we do, very rightly, reject any accusation that this was a deliberate attack on a UN position. That is frankly and simply just not true. The orders of the IDF, of the Israeli Defense Forces operating Lebanon, are clear. The UN personnel, UN positions are to be guarded. There is to be no attacks on such positions. And I can tell you in the Foreign Ministry, we spend a lot of time and effort coordinating with the UN from day one of this crisis to try to make sure that UN personnel are safe and sound and that they won't get caught up in the fighting.
But this was a clearly marked, well-known, established post. Also, the people in that post, before they died, called several times, numerous times, 10 times in 6 hours, saying, we're being bombed. A bomb is landing just 100 meters from us. And every time they were told that the bombing would stop. Why didn't it stop?
Well, that's exactly the questions that the Commission of Inquiry has to answer, because Prime Minister Olmert has ordered the military for a comprehensive inquiry. We will share the results of that inquiry, of that investigation, with the UN, with the relevant countries involved, obviously with the countries who lost their service people in this tragedy. But that's precisely why we have to have an investigation. But I don't think anyone who understands how we operate can accuse Israel of trying to deliberately kill UN personnel. That's not what we want to do. And that accusation is really out of bounds.
What we are receiving is that information that the bomb that caused this, that flattened the compound, was a precision-guided missile. What can you tell us about that? Is that true? And if it was a precision-guided missile, what does this tell us about the targeting of this particular compound?
When you have these sort of tragedies, you automatically have tens, if not hundreds of stories. People heard this, people heard that. It's very important to do this investigation that Prime Minister Olmert has ordered. We have to follow through. We will not conceal anything. And once again, I can assure you that we'll share the results of the investigation.
Precision-guided missile after the UN compound was shelled and people called 10 times in 6 hours to say that they were almost under attack.
And that's why we take it so seriously and that we're having this investigation. And we have promised the UN side full transparency, We've promised that to the other countries involved. There's a war going on, a shooting war. We've been busy coordinating with the UN, doing the maximum effort to make sure their people are safe and sound. We've offered them any logistic support they needed if they wanted to redeploy or things like that. But I can tell you, if there are Israelis who are responsible here, the investigation will come out and that will be shown. But we have to investigate exactly what happened.
And tell us, can you confirm that this was a precision-guided missile?
No, I'm afraid, Relisa, I can't confirm that. I can confirm what the IDF has put out in its first preliminary part of the report, though I urge patience. We have to wait for the whole report to come out. They do acknowledge there was fighting in the area. They do acknowledge that there were Hezbollah rocket launchers in the area. They do acknowledge that we are trying to deal with those Hezbollah targets in the area. And it appears, as a result of the preliminary investigation, that some of our fire might have gone astray and hit the UN position. But let's wait a few more hours. Let's wait for the full report. Once again, we'll share the findings of that report with all the relevant countries and, of course, with the UN.
I still don't understand why, after the UN staff called so many times to say that bombs were falling just 100 meters from them, why did this continue? Why, after the Prime Minister of Israel promised the UN Secretary General that this would stop, why didn't it?
Once again, we're talking about an ongoing military operation against Hezbollah targets in the area. And we know specifically that in that immediate vicinity, there were missiles, rockets fired at Israel, at Israeli civilians, and we had an obligation to stop that. Of course, that makes no excuse. If a stray rocket did hit the UN position, that's something that we will have no tolerance for. But let's wait for the investigation. Once again, we've promised to share the results of the investigation fully with the UN, with the other relevant countries. It's clear, though, and I state this again, no one in Israel deliberately targeted a UN target. That's not our policy. That's not what we want. We want a cooperative relationship with the UN, not anything else.
Foreign Ministry spokesman Mark Regev, thank you very much for speaking with us. We will take a short break now. We will be back with more information on that Rome peace conference, which appears to have collapsed. Sources are telling us that we're trying to verify that and bring you the latest on that development. More after a short break.
Meantime, down at UN headquarters in New York City, and Relitza, everybody waiting to hear what President Bush has to say. Anybody talking about what they expect to hear, what they would like to hear from the U.S. president among the international delegates there?
Well, they're curious to hear as to what he's going to say about Iraq, of course, but they also want to hear the U.S. commitment to what we've heard that the president will talk about, as Bill Schneider mentioned, global fight against AIDS, fighting poverty, illiteracy, the gap between rich and poor. So they want to hear about U.S. commitments, particularly the developing nations. They are the ones who have sent their top leaders en masse to this meeting. This is a very important meeting to them. Once a year that they have a global audience, they have important international leaders here at the United Nations, and they can voice their concerns to that global audience, and they feel like this gives them a voice once a year. So they will be listening to what the U.S. president has to say in a way that it will affect them, and also they are happy to see him among the leaders there. Although Western leaders of major European countries, the top leaders, are not attending. President Jacques Chirac was here just less than 24 hours ago. He came for a meeting with the Brazilian president to whom we're listening right now. He's addressing the United Nations General Assembly. That meeting focused on poverty, barely mentioned Iraq, barely mentioned anything about that. It focused on poverty, on new financial mechanisms to be able to lift the 1 billion people around the world who live in extreme poverty, to lift them out of that poverty. President Chirac is not in the audience this morning. Other major critics from Europe of the war in Iraq, other major European leaders are not here. They have sent their foreign ministers or other ministers to attend this General Assembly meeting.
Relitza, there's got to be some speculation there at UN headquarters about why, because only a year ago you saw almost all of the leaders.
What we heard from a senior spokesman for a senior figure in the UN Secretary General's office is basically that they are happy with the turnout, that there are more than 190 leaders, that a lot of the developing countries have sent their top leaders. They did not want to comment on why it's different this year. Yes, the Western leaders are not sending, they're not attending, they're sending other people to represent them. They did not want to comment on that. However, they did mention that they have a record number of leaders, if you look at it that way, a record number of leaders this year.
All right, we're sitting there at UN headquarters here in Atlanta at the CNN Center. We're waiting for U.S. President George W. Bush to make his address. Not expected to dwell so much on Iraq as it did 1 year ago.
Where Palestinian militants fired several makeshift rockets into southern Israel as Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visited the area. This comes a day after a 3-year-old boy was one of 2 people killed in a similar attack. Relitsa Vasilova joins us now from Jerusalem with the latest. Relitsa?
Zain, the Prime Minister visited Sderot just a few hours ago to reassure its people that such attacks will not happen again, that the Israeli government is going to take all action against Palestinian militants to prevent those rockets from landing again. However, while he was there in Sderot to reassure the people, 2 Qassam rockets landed near Sderot. 2 more landed earlier before he arrived there, one of them injuring a man. But the more serious incident, as you mentioned, what came on Monday, when for the first time in 4 years since the second Intifada was launched, the crude rockets, known for their inaccuracy, actually managed to kill 2 people, including one 3-year-old child and a 50-year-old man when they landed near a kindergarten. That was a red line that the Israeli government said should not have been crossed, and now they're launching a military operation in northern Gaza, specifically centered on the town of Beit Hanun, which is just about 3 kilometers from Sderot itself. The Israeli military has been in that town before. They say it is frequently used by Israeli militants as a launch pad for Qassam rockets against cities in Israeli territory right across the border from Gaza, like Sderot and its environment. We also know that at this point in this operation, which began in pre-dawn hours of Tuesday, 16 Palestinians were injured. 1 Hamas member was killed in an accident as he was handling explosives. We know that the Israeli military has sealed off Beit Hanun. It is in there with tanks and bulldozers, looking for the infrastructure and looking for those who are launching those rockets. Despite those operations, we see that those rockets continue to be launched. Operations continue not just in Beit Hanun. Israeli military operations continue in other places. 2 more Palestinians, 2 more youths were killed. One of them was killed in a stone-throwing accident, and the other one died of his injuries in an incident which happened on Monday. Despite the continuing violence with the rockets being launched across the border from Gaza, the Prime Minister says he will continue and move on.